The winter wind howled through the gap beneath the doorframe, carrying with it the desperate sound of someone trying to speak through chattering teeth. And Jonas Landry nearly dropped his mug of tea when he heard the voice rasp out those words about his doorway being the only warmth for miles. He set the mug down on the rough-hewn table and crossed to the door of his small frontier cabin, hesitating with his hand on the latch, because nothing good ever came knocking after dark in these borderlands, where human settlements bled into orc territories. The voice came again, weaker this time, unmistakably feminine despite its guttural undertones, and Jonas felt his soldier's instincts warring with the simple human decency his mother had beaten into him before the war had taken everything else. He opened the door. The orc woman collapsed forward into his cabin, catching herself on hands and knees before she could sprawl completely across his threshold. Snow clung to her dark hair, which was longer than he had expected, falling past her shoulders in matted tangles that spoke of days without shelter. Her green skin had taken on a grayish cast that Jonas recognized from his years in the Borderlands campaign as the first stage of serious cold exposure. She wore what might have once been leather armor, but was now little more than scraps held together by frozen mud and determination. "Please," she said again, and Jonas could see her small tusks clicking together as she shivered. "Just the doorway. I will not enter further. Just let me stay in the warmth that escapes your home, sir. I have nowhere else." Jonas had killed orcs during the war. He had good reasons for the things he had done, or at least reasons that had seemed good when sergeants were shouting orders and arrows were falling like rain. He had come to this isolated cabin 3 years ago to escape those memories, to work land that no one else wanted because it sat too close to the territories where orcs still roamed free. The irony of an orc woman now begging at his door was not lost on him. "Get inside," he said, reaching down to grasp her arm. "All the way inside. You will die out there." She pulled back from his touch, her dark eyes wide with something that looked like fear. "I cannot. I should not. If you are seen harboring one of my kind, they will burn your home. I only ask for the warmth of your doorway. And I only ask that you not die on my doorstep, because that would be a damned inconvenience come morning when I need to haul water." Jonas did not wait for her to argue further. He grabbed her arm more firmly and hauled her across the threshold, kicking the door shut behind her. She was lighter than he expected, which probably meant she had not eaten properly in days. The orc woman stumbled to her feet, swaying slightly as the warmth of the cabin hit her. Jonas guided her to the chair closest to the fireplace and pushed her down into it before she could protest further. Up close, in the firelight, he could see that she was younger than he had first thought, probably no more than 20 winters if orcs aged anything like humans did. Her face had the strong, broad features of her kind, with high cheekbones and a wide jaw that gave her a fierce appearance even in her current weakened state. But her eyes, those dark eyes that watched him with a mixture of gratitude and terror, were achingly vulnerable. "I am Henna Ashford," she said after a moment, her voice still rough from the cold. "I will leave at first light. I swear it on my mother's tusks." "Jonas Landry," he replied, moving to his small kitchen area to ladle stew from the pot that hung over the cooking fire. "And you will leave when you are strong enough to walk more than 10 paces without collapsing. I did not serve 5 years on the frontier just to watch someone freeze to death in my cabin, because I was too stupid to recognize serious cold exposure." He brought her the bowl and a chunk of bread, watching as she took it with hands that shook badly enough to slosh some of the stew onto her lap. She ate like someone who had not seen food in far too long, barely chewing before swallowing, and Jonas had to tell her twice to slow down before she made herself sick. When the bowl was empty, He took it from her and refilled it without comment. "Why did you let me in?" Henna asked when she had finished the second bowl, some color returning to her green cheeks. "Humans do not show kindness to orcs. Not anymore. Not after the war." Jonas settled into the chair across from her, cradling his own mug of tea between his palms. "I let you in because leaving you to freeze would make me the kind of man I do not want to be. Simple as that. Nothing is ever simple between our kinds." She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them in a gesture that made her look impossibly young. "I was cast out from my clan 3 weeks ago. I have been walking south ever since, looking for somewhere that might take me in, but no orc settlement will harbor an outcast, and no human settlement will harbor an orc. Your doorway was the first warmth I have felt in days. Why were you cast out?" Henna was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I refused to participate in a raid on a human village. There were children there, and elders who could not fight back. My clan leader said it was necessary, that humans had done worse to us during the war, but I could not make myself believe that vengeance against innocents was justice. So they cast me out, made me clanless. And a clanless orc is as good as dead in these lands." Jonas found himself studying her face, looking for signs of deception, but all he saw was exhaustion and resignation. The war has been over for 3 years. The war is never over for those who lost too much to forgive. She met his eyes, and there was an old pain in her gaze that Jonas recognized because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. "Your people burned orc villages. My people raided human settlements. Everyone has blood on their hands, and everyone thinks their blood is more righteous than the others. I am tired of blood. I just wanted it to stop." Jonas understood that feeling better than she could know. "You can stay until you are strong enough to travel safely. I have a root cellar that stays warm enough. You can sleep there where no one will see if anyone comes calling." "Why would you risk that?" "Because I have nowhere warm but this cabin, and you have nowhere warm but my doorway, and maybe that is enough of a reason." He stood, moving to the trunk where he kept his spare blankets. "Come morning, we will figure out the rest." He showed her to the root cellar, which was accessible through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. It was not large, but it was lined with stones that held the heat from the cabin above, and it was stocked with enough preserved vegetables and salted meat to last through the winter. Jonas made her a pallet from blankets and gave her one of his old wool shirts to sleep in since her own clothing was still damp and frozen. "Thank you," Henna said quietly as he turned to climb back up the ladder. "I will not forget this kindness." Jonas paused, looking back at her. "Get some sleep. We can talk more tomorrow." He did not sleep well that night. Every creak of the cabin made him worry that soldiers or hunters had discovered his secret. And every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of orcs he had killed during the war, wondering if any of them had been like Henna, just trying to survive in a world that had no place for them. When dawn finally broke, gray and cold, Jonas found himself standing at the trapdoor, listening to the soft sound of Henna's breathing below. She emerged a few hours later, moving stiffly but with more strength than she had shown the night before. Jonas was making breakfast, such as it was. Porridge with dried berries and honey, the kind of simple fare that had sustained him through 3 winters alone in this cabin. Henna watched him work with cautious eyes, as if waiting for him to tell her it had all been a mistake and she needed to leave. "Sit," Jonas said, nodding to the table. "You need to eat more to recover your strength." They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the scrape of spoons against wooden bowls. Jonas found himself stealing glances at her, noting details he had missed in the chaos of the night before. She had scars on her hands and forearms, the kind that came from weapons training. Her posture, even weakened, had the bearing of someone who knew how to fight. But there was also a gentleness in the way she held her spoon, careful not to make noise, mindful of taking up space in his home. "How long have you lived here alone?" Henna asked finally, breaking the silence. 3 years. Came here after I mustered out of the frontier army. Wanted somewhere quiet where I did not have to think about the war every waking moment. Did it work? Jonas gave a short, bitter laugh. No, but at least here the only person I disappoint is myself. Henna nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. I know that feeling. After I was cast out, I thought perhaps I could find peace in isolation. But it turns out that being alone just gives you more time to remember all the things you wish you could forget. They fell into an uneasy routine over the following days. Henna stayed in the root cellar during the daylight hours when there was a chance someone might pass by the cabin. Though Jonas's nearest neighbor was a half-day's ride away, and visitors were rare in the depths of winter. In the evenings, she would emerge to eat and sit by the fire, and slowly, carefully, they began to talk. Jonas learned that Henna had been a scout for her clan, trained to move silently through the forests and gather intelligence on human settlements. She had been good at it, good enough that her refusal to participate in the raid had been seen as an even greater betrayal, because her clan leader had counted on her skills. She spoke of her family with a mixture of love and pain. A mother who had taught her to track deer through snow, a father who had died defending their village from human soldiers, younger siblings who had not spoken to her when the clan leader had pronounced her outcast. In turn, Jonas told her about his own family, all lost to illness the winter before he had enlisted. He spoke of his time in the army, carefully editing out the worst of what he had seen and done, but Henna seemed to understand the gaps in his story. She did not press him for details, just listened with patient attention that Jonas had not experienced in years. "You regret letting me stay?" Henna asked one evening, perhaps a week after her arrival. She was helping him prepare vegetables for stew, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the simple knife he had given her. Jonas considered the question carefully. "No, but I would be lying if I said it was not complicated. I spent 5 years fighting your people. Saw friends die at orc hands, and now here you are in my cabin, and all I can think is that you are nothing like the monsters they told us you were." "We are not monsters," Henna said softly. "But we are also not innocent. I have heard the stories our warriors tell of battles with humans. We celebrate victories that mean human families will never see their loved ones again. It is the same thing, just from the other side. Maybe that is the problem. Maybe there should not be sides at all." "That is a beautiful thought, Jonas Landry. But the world we live in does not allow for such things. There are only sides, and choosing one means becoming an enemy to the other." Jonas set down his knife, turning to look at her directly. "Then maybe we need to start making a different world." Henna met his gaze, and something shifted in the air between them. It was not attraction, not yet, but it was the recognition of two people who had been carrying the same weight and had suddenly found someone else who understood the burden. She looked away first, returning her attention to the vegetables, but Jonas saw the faint green flush that darkened her cheeks. The next morning brought their first real test. Jonas was out behind the cabin, splitting wood for the fire, when he heard the sound of hoofbeats on the frozen trail that led to his property. He counted 3 horses, which meant at least 3 riders, and his heart began to hammer in his chest. He forced himself to keep splitting wood, to look like a man who had nothing to hide, even as his mind raced through ways to keep Henna safe. The riders were border patrol, 2 humans and a dwarf, wearing the mismatched armor of frontier militia. Jonas recognized the leader, a grizzled man named Thomas Brennan who had served in the same company as Jonas during the war. Thomas had lost an eye to an orc blade and wore his hatred like a badge of honor. "Jonas Landry," Thomas called out, reining in his horse. "Did not expect to find you still alive out here. Most men who settle this close to orc territory end up decorating their own doorposts within a year." "Thomas Brennan," Jonas replied, setting down his axe with careful casualness. "What brings the patrol this far north, hunting an orc?" "Female, probably injured or sick based on the tracks. Lost her trail about a mile south of here. You seen any sign?" Jonas felt his stomach clench but kept his expression neutral. "I see orc sign all the time. This close to the border, it would be strange if I did not. But I have not seen any orcs themselves in weeks." Thomas dismounted, his good eye scanning the cabin and surrounding area with professional suspicion. "Mind if we take a look around, just to be safe?" "I mind," Jonas said flatly. "This is my land and I do not recall inviting you to search it." "Now, Jonas, do not be difficult. We are just doing our job. That orc is dangerous." "How do you know? Have you spoken to her? Or are you just assuming because she is an orc?" Thomas's face darkened. "I do not need to speak to an orc to know it is dangerous. I learned that lesson when one of them took my eye. Now step aside and let us do our work, or I will start wondering why you are so keen to protect orc interests." Jonas felt his hand moving toward the axe, even as he knew it was a stupid thing to do. 3 against 1 were bad odds, and if he attacked the patrol, he would be marked as an orc sympathizer at best and a traitor at worst. But he could not let them search the cabin, could not let them find Henna. "Thomas," he said, forcing his voice to stay calm, "we served together. You know I am no friend to orcs, but I am also no friend to people who want to search a man's home without cause. The orc you are hunting probably moved on days ago. Check the trails to the west. There are cave systems there where orcs like to hole up." Thomas studied Jonas for a long moment, suspicion and old camaraderie warring on his scarred face. Finally, he spat on the ground and remounted his horse. "Fine. But if we find out you have been lying, if we find out you have been helping that creature, there will be consequences. Brother in arms or not." Jonas watched them ride away, not moving until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. Only then did he let out the breath he had been holding and return to the cabin. Henna was standing at the edge of the trapdoor, her face pale. "They are hunting me," she said unnecessarily. "They are hunting an orc. They do not know it is you specifically, and they do not know you are here, but we need to be more careful. I should leave. I am putting you in danger." Jonas shook his head firmly. "You are not strong enough yet. Another week, maybe 2, and then we can talk about you leaving. Until then, you stay in the cellar during the day, and we make sure there is no sign of you if anyone else comes calling." "Why are you doing this?" Henna asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "Why risk everything for someone like me?" "Because someone like you risked everything to not hurt innocent people, and that is worth protecting." Jonas moved to the fire, stirring the coals needlessly just to have something to do with his hands. "And maybe because I am tired of the war never ending. Maybe because I want to believe that kindness is not dead in this world." Henna climbed fully out of the cellar, crossing to stand beside him. She was close enough that Jonas could feel the warmth radiating from her green skin, could smell the wood smoke and herbs that clung to her borrowed clothing. "You are a strange man, Jonas Landry. I have been called worse." She surprised him by laughing, a low, rich sound that filled the cabin with unexpected warmth. "I imagine you have. You have the look of a man who speaks his mind even when he should not. That particular trait has gotten me into more trouble than I care to admit." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment. and Jonas found himself acutely aware of her presence in a way that had nothing to do with the danger she represented. Somewhere over the past week, Henna had stopped being an orc in his mind and had become simply Henna, sharp and sad and stronger than she knew. "I will stay another week," Henna said finally. "But then I must go, whether I am fully recovered or not. I will not be the reason you lose everything." Jonas wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in her eyes and knew it would be pointless. "1 week, and in that time we figure out where you can go that will be safe. There is nowhere safe for an outcast orc. Then we make somewhere safe." Henna looked at him with something that might have been hope, fragile and uncertain. "You really believe that is possible?" "I have to believe it is possible, or else what was the point of surviving the war?" The week that followed was the strangest of Jonas's life. During the days, he went about his normal routine, tending his small garden in the greenhouse he had built against the south side of the cabin, checking his trap lines for rabbits and other small game, hauling water from the stream that ran along his property line. But in the evenings, when Henna emerged from the cellar, his cabin transformed into something he had not realized he had been missing. She was good company, quick-witted and well-read despite having grown up in an orc clan that most humans would have dismissed as savage. Her mother had taught her to read using books stolen from human settlements, and Henna had a particular fondness for poetry that surprised Jonas. She would recite verses from memory while they worked on evening chores, her guttural orc accent giving a strange beauty to the human words. Jonas found himself looking forward to those evenings with an intensity that worried him. He had grown accustomed to solitude, had convinced himself that he preferred it, but Henna's presence made him realize how lonely he had been. The cabin felt warmer with her in it, and not just because of the fire. There was a rightness to having someone to talk to, someone who understood the weight of having made hard choices and living with the consequences. On the 4th night of that week, Jonas made the mistake of asking about her tusks. Henna had been self-conscious about them since arriving, often covering her mouth when she spoke or ate, and Jonas had noticed but said nothing until his curiosity finally overcame his manners. "They are considered ugly among humans," Henna said, her hand moving instinctively to her mouth. "I know this. During the war, human soldiers would mock captured orcs about them, call them pig-faced and worse." "They are not ugly," Jonas said, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "They are part of who you are, and who you are is not ugly." Henna stared at him, her dark eyes wide with surprise. "You mean that?" "I would not say it if I did not mean it. I am many things, Henna Ashford, but a liar is not one of them." She smiled then, a real smile that showed her small tusks fully, and Jonas felt something shift in his chest. It was not a dramatic feeling, not the lightning strike of love at first sight that bards sang about, but rather a quiet recognition that this person mattered to him in a way that went beyond simple kindness to a stranger. He cared what happened to her. He wanted her to be safe and happy. And he was beginning to suspect that he did not want her to leave at all. If Henna noticed the change in his demeanor, she gave no sign. She simply continued to smile, continued to help him prepare their evening meal, continued to fill his cabin with her presence. But that night, after she had retreated to the cellar, Jonas lay awake in his bed and forced himself to confront the truth he had been avoiding. He was developing feelings for an orc woman. In a world where such things were not just forbidden but actively dangerous, where humans and orcs were supposed to be eternal enemies, he was falling for someone he should have turned away from his door. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to put distance between them, to help her leave as soon as possible and forget she had ever been there. But Jonas had never been particularly good at doing the smart or safe thing. The next morning, he woke to find smoke coming from the kitchen area of the cabin. He bolted upright, grabbing for the knife he kept beside his bed, only to realize that the smell was not the acrid stench of a destructive fire, but rather the savory aroma of cooking food. He climbed out of bed, pulling on trousers and a shirt, and found Henna standing at the stove, carefully frying eggs in his cast-iron skillet. "You should not be up here during the day," Jonas said, even as he found himself unable to be truly angry at the sight of her cooking in his kitchen. "I wanted to do something for you," Henna replied, not turning from the stove. "You have given me shelter and food and safety. The least I can do is make you breakfast. The least you can do is stay hidden so that you do not get us both killed. There is no one around for miles." I checked from the window. "Please, Jonas, let me do this one small thing." Jonas sighed but moved to sit at the table, watching her work. She had clearly done this before, her movements efficient and confident as she plated the eggs and added bread toasted over the fire. She brought the food to him with a small smile, then retreated to make her own plate. They ate together in the morning light, and Jonas found himself studying her face, memorizing the details he had been trying not to notice. The way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she was amused. The small scar above her left eyebrow that she said came from a childhood accident involving a tree and excessive confidence. The way she chewed on her lower lip when she was thinking. "What are you looking at?" Henna asked, catching him staring. "You," Jonas admitted, because lying seemed pointless at this stage. "I am looking at you and trying to figure out how my life became so complicated so quickly. Is it truly complicated, or is it only complicated because the world tells us it should be? That is a dangerous way of thinking." "Perhaps, but I have already been cast out by my clan for dangerous thinking. What is one more dangerous thought?" She set down her fork, meeting his eyes with an intensity that made his breath catch. "I am not a fool, Jonas Landry. I know what is happening between us. I feel it too. And I know it is impossible. Nothing is impossible. A human and an orc. That is beyond impossible. That is unthinkable. Your people would kill you for it. Mine have already cast me out, but they would kill you on sight simply for being human. There is no world where we could be together." Jonas reached across the table, covering her hand with his own before he could think better of it. Her skin was warm, slightly rougher than human skin, but not unpleasantly so. "Then maybe we need to make a new world. You said that before. But how? How do we make a world that does not exist?" "I do not know," Jonas admitted. "But I know that I do not want you to leave. And I know that the thought of you going back out there, alone and hunted, makes me feel like someone is carving out my chest with a dull knife. So maybe we start with that. Maybe we start with not wanting to be apart and figure out the rest as we go." Henna turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. "You are asking me to stay, truly stay, not just until I am recovered, but to make a life here. I am asking you to consider it. I am asking you to give me a chance to prove that it could work. And if it does not work, if the patrols come back, if someone discovers me, then we face it together." Henna was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing small circles on the back of his hand. "I have spent the last 3 weeks running. Part of me wants nothing more than to stop running, to stay in this cabin with you and pretend the rest of the world does not exist. But the other part of me, the part that got me cast out in the first place, knows that what we want and what is safe are two very different things. I am not asking for safe. I am asking for a chance." She pulled her hand back, standing abruptly and moving to the window. Jonas waited, his heart hammering in his chest, knowing that this moment would determine everything that came next. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes that promised another hard winter night. "I will stay until the spring," Henna said finally, her back still to him. I will help you through the winter, and we will see if this thing between us is real or just two lonely people seeking comfort in a harsh world. But come spring, we will reassess. We will decide if it is truly possible to build a life together or if we have been fooling ourselves. It was not the commitment Jonas had been hoping for, but it was more than he had any right to expect. Until spring, then. Henna turned from the window, and there was a small smile on her face, cautious but genuine. Until spring. The dynamic between them shifted after that conversation. They were no longer host and guest, no longer soldier and former enemy playing at civility. They were two people tentatively exploring the possibility of something more, careful not to move too fast but unable to resist the pull between them. Jonas found himself teaching Henna the skills she would need to survive on a frontier homestead. She was a quick study, learning to identify which plants in his greenhouse needed more water and which needed less, how to set and check trap lines without leaving obvious signs of human or orc presence, how to preserve food for the long months when fresh game was scarce. In turn, Henna taught Jonas things she had learned as an orc scout, how to move silently through snow, how to read weather patterns in the behavior of birds and other animals, how to find water even when the streams were frozen solid. They worked together during the day now, the risk of discovery seemingly worth the companionship they found in each other. Jonas knew it was dangerous, knew that anyone passing by might see Henna and raise the alarm, but he found himself caring less and less about the danger with each passing day. The cabin was isolated enough that visitors were rare, and Jonas had always had a good sense for when people were approaching. It was a calculated risk, but one he was willing to take. At night, they would sit by the fire and talk until the logs burned down to embers. Jonas learned more about orc culture than he had ever known during the war, learned that orcs had rich traditions of storytelling and music, that they valued honor and loyalty above almost everything else, that they grieved their dead, and celebrated their living with the same intensity as any human. Henna spoke of her childhood with a wistful longing that made Jonas's chest ache, describing festivals where the entire clan would gather to share food and songs, hunts where young orcs proved their skill and courage, quiet moments with her mother learning the names and properties of every plant in their territory. "Do you miss it?" Jonas asked one evening, watching the firelight play across her green features. "Your clan." "Every day," Henna admitted, "but I do not miss who I would have had to become to stay there. My clan leader wanted warriors who would kill without question, who would see every human as an enemy worthy of death. I could not be that person. I tried for the sake of my family, but I could not make myself hate an entire people just because we have been at war. For what it is worth, I think you made the right choice. It takes more courage to walk away from your family for your principles than it does to stay and compromise them." Henna reached out, her hand finding his in the space between their chairs. "Thank you for saying that. Most days I believe it. But there are moments when I wonder if I am just a coward who was too weak to do what needed to be done." "You are not a coward. Trust me, I have seen cowards and they do not look like you." She squeezed his hand, and they sat in comfortable silence until the fire died down. When Henna stood to retreat to the cellar, Jonas found himself standing as well, not quite ready for the evening to end. "Stay up here tonight," he said impulsively. "Sleep by the fire. The cellar is too cold, and I do not like the thought of you down there when there is warmth and comfort up here." "Where will you sleep?" "In my bed, same as always. I'm not trying to pressure you into anything, Henna. I just want you to be comfortable." She studied his face, searching for ulterior motives, but whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "All right, thank you." Jonas made her a pallet near the fire using his spare blankets and an old pillow that had seen better days. Henna settled onto it with a sigh of contentment, and Jonas tried not to notice how the firelight turned her green skin to gold, tried not to think about how much he wanted to lie down beside her and pull her into his arms. He retreated to his own bed instead, lying awake in the darkness and listening to the sound of her breathing from the other room. It was both torture and comfort, knowing she was so close but maintaining the distance she needed to feel safe. Jonas had never been good at patience, but for Henna, he found reserves of it he had not known he possessed. The winter deepened, and with it, their relationship. There were moments of awkwardness and uncertainty, times when the cultural divide between them felt too wide to cross. Henna had customs and expectations that Jonas did not understand, and he had his own habits that confused her. But they worked through the misunderstandings with patience and humor, learning to communicate not just in words but in the small gestures and considerations that spoke louder than language. Jonas noticed that Henna had a habit of leaving small offerings by the door each morning. A perfect pine cone, a smooth stone from the stream, a sprig of winter herbs. When he asked about it, she explained that it was an orc tradition, a way of thanking the spirits of a place for providing shelter. Jonas started adding his own offerings, and the small collection by the door became a symbol of their joined presence in the cabin. For her part, Henna learned to appreciate human customs that had initially seemed strange to her. Jonas celebrated the winter solstice with a feast of preserved foods and mulled wine, explaining that his family had always marked the longest night with a celebration of light and warmth. Henna had never experienced such a celebration, but she threw herself into helping him prepare, and they stayed up through the entire night, keeping the fire burning bright and sharing stories, until the sun finally rose on the shortest day of the year. It was on solstice night, warmed by wine and firelight and the glow of good company, that Jonas finally worked up the courage to kiss her. They were sitting close together, sharing the last of the mulled wine from a single mug, when Henna turned to say something and found her face inches from his. The words died on her lips, and Jonas saw his own longing reflected in her dark eyes. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Henna's answer was to close the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that tasted of wine and winter spices. Her tusks brushed against his face, a strange sensation but not an unpleasant one, and Jonas found himself cupping her face in his hands, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. When they finally pulled apart, Henna was smiling, that rare, full smile that showed her tusks and lit up her entire face. "I have wanted to do that for weeks. I have wanted to do that since the morning you made me breakfast," Jonas admitted. "Maybe longer. Why did you wait?" "Because I wanted you to be sure. Because I wanted you to know that you could stay here without any expectations or pressure. Because I wanted this to be real and not just convenience." Henna kissed him again, softer this time, a gentle press of lips that felt like a promise. "It is real, Jonas Landry. Whatever this is between us, it is real." They did not go further that night, both of them aware that what they were building was too important to rush. But Henna moved her sleeping pallet closer to Jonas's bed, and they fell asleep with their hands clasped between them, a bridge across the small distance that separated them. The weeks that followed were the happiest Jonas could remember since before the war. He and Henna fell into an easy partnership, working together during the day and spending their evenings exploring the new dimensions of their relationship. They were careful not to move too fast, both aware that the physical differences between them required patience and communication. But they learned each other slowly, trading kisses and caresses by firelight, discovering what brought pleasure and what felt awkward or uncomfortable. Jonas learned that Henna was ticklish along her ribs, that she made a small rumbling sound in the back of her throat when she was content, that she liked to trace the scars on his hands and arms while they talked, each one a story from his past. Henna, in turn, showed him the traditional orc courting braids, weaving small sections of his hair into intricate patterns that signified commitment and affection in her culture. Jonas wore them proudly, even though he knew he would have to undo them before anyone from the human settlement saw. But their happiness was fragile, built on a foundation of isolation and secrecy that could not last forever. Jonas knew that eventually the spring would come, and with it, the decision they had been putting off. Could they truly build a life together? Or were they just delaying the inevitable pain of separation? The answer came sooner than either of them expected, carried on the hooves of horses and the shouts of angry men. It was a morning in late winter, the kind of day when the sun shone bright on melting snow and the air smelled of approaching spring. Jonas was outside chopping wood while Henna worked in the greenhouse, transplanting seedlings into larger pots. They were both so focused on their tasks that neither of them heard the riders approaching until it was too late. Thomas Brennan was back, and this time he had brought more than just a patrol. There were at least a dozen armed men, militiamen and hunters and soldiers, all wearing the grim expressions of people who had come to do violence. Jonas saw them crest the hill that led to his cabin and felt his blood turn to ice. "Henna!" he shouted, dropping his axe and running toward the greenhouse. "Get inside! Hide!" But it was too late. Thomas had already spotted her through the greenhouse's translucent walls, and his shout of triumph cut through the morning air like a blade. "The orc! Landry has been harboring the orc!" Jonas reached the greenhouse just as Henna emerged, her face pale but determined. "I will not hide and let you face this alone. You have to. If they take you, they will kill you. And if they think you have been sheltering me willingly, they will kill you too. We face this together or not at all." There was no time to argue. The riders had reached the cabin, dismounting in a rough semicircle that blocked any easy escape. Thomas strode forward, his scarred face twisted with anger and something that looked like betrayal. "Jonas Landry," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "I should have known. Should have trusted my instincts when you turned us away last time. You have been hiding an orc, sleeping with the enemy. Do you have any idea what the penalty is for treason?" "I have committed no treason," Jonas replied, stepping in front of Henna in a futile gesture of protection. "I gave shelter to someone in need. That is not a crime. Giving shelter to an orc is the definition of treason. We are at war with her kind. The war ended 3 years ago, Thomas. Or have you been too busy nursing your hatred to notice?" Thomas's hand moved to the sword at his hip. "The war will never be over while there are still orcs to kill. Now step aside and let us do what needs to be done." "No." Jonas's voice was flat, brooking no argument. "You will have to go through me. That can be arranged." Thomas drew his sword, and the other men followed suit, the sound of steel being unsheathed filling the morning air with menace. Jonas was reaching for the knife at his belt, knowing it was inadequate but unable to simply surrender, when Henna stepped around him. She held her hands up, palms out in a gesture of surrender. "I will go with you peacefully," she said, her voice steady despite the fear Jonas could see in her eyes. "Do not hurt Jonas. He was only being kind. He did not know I was wanted." "Henna, no." Jonas grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back, but she shook him off gently. "It is all right," she said softly for his ears only. "This was always going to happen. We both knew it. I will not let them take you. You do not have a choice. But thank you, Jonas Landry, for giving me a winter of warmth and kindness. Thank you for showing me that not all humans are monsters." Thomas was moving forward, pulling out a length of rope to bind Henna's hands. Jonas felt something break inside him, felt the last vestiges of his self-control shatter like ice on a spring river. He lunged at Thomas, his knife drawn, driven by desperation and rage and the knowledge that he could not let Henna be taken without a fight. He managed to get in one good hit, his blade opening a cut along Thomas's arm before two of the other men grabbed him and wrestled him to the ground. Jonas fought with everything he had, landing punches and kicks even as they pinned him down, even as Thomas stood over him with murder in his eyes. "You would kill your own kind for an orc," Thomas spat, blood dripping from his wounded arm. "You are worse than a traitor. You are an abomination. And you are a coward who hides his fear behind hatred." Jonas struggled against the men holding him, his eyes fixed on Henna as Thomas bound her wrists. "Henna, I will find you. I will get you back." "Jonas, no." Henna's voice was sad but firm. "Live your life. Forget about me. I am not worth dying for." "That is where you are wrong," Jonas said, and even with his face pressed into the snow, even with his arms twisted behind his back, his voice rang with absolute conviction. "You are worth everything." Thomas kicked Jonas hard in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. "Shut your mouth, traitor. You should be grateful we are not burning you alive for what you have done. But lucky for you, the magistrate will want to question you before passing sentence. You will both hang together, you and your orc whore, and maybe that will serve as a warning to anyone else who thinks to betray their own kind." They hauled Jonas to his feet, binding his hands as they had bound Henna's. He and Henna were thrown onto horses, surrounded by armed riders who kept their weapons drawn and ready. As they rode away from the cabin, Jonas looked back at the small home he had built, at the greenhouse and the garden and the chopped wood stacked neatly beside the door, and wondered if he would ever see it again. The ride to the nearest human settlement took most of the day. Jonas and Henna were not allowed to speak to each other, separated by armed guards who watched them with hostile suspicion. But Jonas managed to catch Henna's eye several times, and what he saw there broke his heart. She looked resigned, as if she had always known this was how her story would end. Jonas, however, was not resigned. His mind was already working through possibilities, thinking of ways to escape, of people he could appeal to, of arguments he could make that might save Henna's life if not his own. He had not survived 5 years of war by giving up when things looked hopeless, and he was not about to start now. The settlement was called Milford, a frontier town that had grown up around a sawmill and served as a trading post for trappers and farmers. Jonas had been there a handful of times, mostly to trade for supplies he could not produce himself. It was not a large place, perhaps 200 souls, but it had a magistrate and a jail, which was apparently all that was needed for the justice that awaited him and Henna. They were thrown into a cell together, a small stone room with a single barred window and a floor covered in moldy straw. The door clanged shut behind them with a finality that made Jonas's stomach clench. Henna immediately moved to the corner farthest from the door, curling up with her knees to her chest in a posture that reminded Jonas painfully of the first night she had spent in his cabin. "I am sorry," she said after a long silence. "This is my fault. I should have left when I was strong enough. I should not have let myself believe that we could have something real." Jonas crossed to her, ignoring his bound hands to sit beside her. "Do not apologize for hope, and do not apologize for us. Whatever happens, I do not regret a single moment of the time we spent together. They are going to kill us, Jonas. You know that. The magistrate will hear the evidence, will see that you sheltered an orc, and he will have no choice but to order our execution. That is the law. Then the law is wrong, and it needs to change. One person cannot change the law. One person cannot change centuries of hatred and war." "Maybe not," Jonas conceded, "but I can try, and I will keep trying until my last breath because you are worth fighting for." Henna leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust and exhaustion. "You are a fool, Jonas Landry. A brave, kind, foolish man. I have been called worse." They sat together in the growing darkness, drawing what comfort they could from each other's presence. Jonas's mind continued to race, searching for any angle that might save them, but the options seemed increasingly limited. They were in a human settlement, surrounded by people who saw Henna as a monster and Jonas as a traitor. They had no allies, no resources, no leverage to bargain with, unless... An idea began to form in Jonas's mind, dangerous and probably futile, but still more of a chance than simply waiting to be executed. He thought of the story Henna had told him about why she had been cast out, about her refusal to raid a human village. If he could find a way to tell that story, to make the people of Milford see Henna as something other than a monster, perhaps he could at least save her life. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. The next morning, they were dragged before the magistrate, a severe-looking man named Peter Morrison, who had the kind of face that suggested he did not believe in mercy. The proceeding was held in the town's meeting hall, with half the settlement crowded in to watch. Jonas could feel the weight of their hostility, could see the way they looked at Henna with fear and hatred, and his heart sank. Thomas Brennan spoke first, laying out the evidence of Jonas's crime. He had sheltered an orc, had hidden her from the patrol, had even been living with her in what Thomas described with disgusted emphasis as an unnatural relationship. The crowd muttered and gasped at appropriate moments, and Jonas could see the magistrate's expression growing darker with each revelation. When Thomas finished, Magistrate Morrison turned his cold eyes to Jonas. "You deny these charges?" "I do not deny that I gave shelter to Henna Ashford," Jonas said clearly. "I would do it again in a heartbeat." The crowd erupted in angry shouts, and the magistrate had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. "You admit to treason then? You admit to consorting with the enemy?" "I admit to showing kindness to someone in need. If that is treason, then perhaps the definition of treason needs to be reconsidered." "Do not lecture me about treason, soldier. I know your service record. You fought bravely during the war, which makes your betrayal all the more incomprehensible. Why would you throw away your honor for an orc?" Jonas took a deep breath, knowing this was his only chance. "Because Henna Ashford is not my enemy. She was cast out by her clan for refusing to participate in a raid on a human village. She could not make herself kill innocent people, children and elders who could not defend themselves, and her clan exiled her for that choice. She was dying in the snow outside my door, and I let her in because leaving someone to freeze would have made me the kind of man I do not want to be. Over the winter, I got to know her. I learned that she is brave and kind and honorable. I learned that she hates the war as much as I do. And I learned that maybe, just maybe, the line between human and orc is not as clear as we have been taught." "That is orc propaganda," someone shouted from the crowd. "They will say anything to gain our trust. Is it propaganda?" Jonas challenged, turning to address the crowd directly. "Or is it possible that we have been so focused on our hatred that we cannot see individuals anymore? Henna could have killed me a dozen times over the winter. I was asleep in my bed while she moved freely around my cabin. She could have slit my throat or poisoned my food or done any number of things. But she did not, because she is not a monster. She is a person who made a choice to show mercy, and she paid for that choice with everything she had." Magistrate Morrison banged his gavel again. "This is a court of law, not a philosophical debate. The law is clear. Any human who gives aid or comfort to an orc during wartime is guilty of treason. The penalty is death. "The war is over," Jonas shouted, frustration and fear making his voice crack. "How many more people have to die before we accept that the war is over? The war will be over when all the orcs are dead or driven from our lands." Morrison's voice was implacable. "Not before. And those who side with orcs will share their fate." He raised his gavel to pass sentence, but before he could bring it down, a voice from the back of the hall spoke up. "Wait." Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was an older woman, gray-haired and bent with age, leaning heavily on a walking stick. Jonas recognized her as Esther Whitley, a widow who ran a small farm on the edge of town. He had traded with her a few times, found her to be fair and decent, but he had no idea why she was speaking up now. "Magistrate Morrison," Esther said, making her way slowly to the front of the hall. "I would like to speak before you pass sentence. This is highly irregular, Goodwife Whitley, I am aware, but I have information that may be relevant to this case." Morrison frowned but nodded. "Very well. Speak." Esther turned to face the crowd, her eyes sweeping across the assembled faces before settling on Henna. "I know this orc. Not personally, but I know of her. 20 years ago, my son was part of a scouting party that was ambushed by orcs in the borderlands. He was badly wounded, left for dead while his companions fled. He should have died out there. But an orc woman found him. She was young, probably not much more than a girl, but she bound his wounds and gave him water. She did not speak our language, but my son said it was clear she was trying to help him. She stayed with him through the night, keeping him warm and safe from predators, and in the morning she helped him onto his horse and pointed him toward the human settlements." The hall had gone quiet, everyone hanging on Esther's words. "My son survived because of that orc woman's kindness. He lived for another 10 years before illness took him, and he never forgot what she did. He described her to me many times: green skin, small tusks, dark hair, and a distinctive scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident." Esther turned to Henna. "Show us your face, child." Henna, who had been silent throughout the proceedings, slowly lifted her head. Her scar was clearly visible, a thin white line cutting through her green skin. Esther nodded slowly. "That is her, or someone very like her. My son said the orc who saved him wore a necklace with a carved stone pendant in the shape of a wolf. Do you still have such a necklace?" Henna's hand moved to her throat, where a leather cord disappeared beneath her shirt. She pulled it out, revealing a small stone wolf, worn smooth by years of handling. "My mother made it for me," Henna said softly, "when I completed my first successful hunt. I have worn it every day since." The hall erupted in confused murmuring, people unsure what to make of this revelation. Jonas felt hope flare in his chest, fragile but real. Magistrate Morrison banged his gavel. "This is all very touching, but it does not change the facts of this case. Even if this orc did show kindness to a human 20 years ago, that does not excuse the crime of sheltering her now. Does it not?" Esther challenged. "If this orc has a history of showing mercy to humans, if she has proven herself to be different from the warriors who raid our villages, does that not matter at all? Are we so consumed by hatred that we cannot recognize when someone is trying to bridge the divide between our peoples?" "The law is the law," Morrison insisted, but Jonas could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. "The law was written during a time of war, to protect us from those who would aid our enemies. But if the war is truly over, if we are to move forward into a new era of peace, then perhaps the law needs to be applied with wisdom and mercy rather than blind adherence to the letter." Other voices began to join Esther's, people in the crowd arguing back and forth about whether the orc deserved mercy, whether Jonas had committed treason or simply shown the kind of kindness that should be encouraged. Jonas watched the magistrate's face, saw him weighing the growing dissent against his own sense of duty to the law. Finally, Morrison raised his hand for silence. "I will not make a hasty decision on this matter. The prisoners will be returned to their cell while I consult with the town council. We will reconvene tomorrow at midday to deliver a verdict." It was not the reprieve Jonas had hoped for, but it was better than an immediate death sentence. He and Henna were escorted back to their cell, and this time Jonas allowed himself to feel a small measure of hope. "Did you really save that woman's son?" he asked Henna once they were alone. "I remember finding a wounded human scout when I was very young. I knew I should have left him to die. It was what my clan would have expected, but I could not do it. He looked so afraid, so young, even though he was probably older than me, so I helped him." She touched the wolf pendant at her throat. "I never knew if he survived. I never told anyone what I had done because I knew they would see it as weakness. It was not weakness. It was the same courage that made you refuse to raid that village, the same courage that brought you to my door." Jonas reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "We are going to survive this, Henna. I can feel it. I hope you are right. But even if we do survive, what kind of life can we have? We will always be looking over our shoulders, always afraid of being discovered. Then we will go somewhere remote, somewhere even more isolated than my cabin. We will build a life away from people who cannot see past their hatred." "That sounds lonely." "Not if we have each other." Henna leaned into him, and they sat together in the fading light, two people from different worlds who had found something precious and were determined to hold on to it no matter the cost. The next day seemed to take forever to arrive. Jonas and Henna were given food and water by a guard who would not meet their eyes, and they waited in tense silence for the sound of footsteps that would signal their return to the hall. When the summons finally came, Jonas felt his stomach clench with anticipation and fear. The hall was even more crowded than before, packed with people who had come to see how this unprecedented case would be resolved. Magistrate Morrison looked tired, as if he had not slept, and Jonas suspected he had spent the night locked in difficult discussions with the town council. "Jonas Landry and Henna Ashford," Morrison began, his voice formal. "This court has spent considerable time deliberating your case. We have heard testimony about the orcs' past actions showing mercy to humans. We have considered the nature of the crime you are accused of and the circumstances surrounding it, and we have discussed at length what kind of precedent our decision will set for future cases of this nature." He paused, and Jonas held his breath. "It is the decision of this court that while Jonas Landry did technically violate the law by sheltering an orc, the unique circumstances of this case warrant mercy. The orc woman, Henna Ashford, has demonstrated a pattern of choosing mercy over violence, of refusing to participate in actions that would harm innocent humans. She is clearly not a threat to this settlement or to humanity in general. Therefore, she will be granted her freedom, with the condition that she leaves human territories and does not return." Relief flooded through Jonas, so intense it made him dizzy. Henna was going to live, but his relief was short-lived as Morrison continued. "As for Jonas Landry, while we recognize that his actions were motivated by compassion rather than malice, we cannot simply ignore his violation of the law. To do so would be to invite others to flout the law whenever they feel their personal judgment supersedes community safety. Therefore, Jonas Landry is sentenced to 1 year of service to this settlement, working under supervision to repair and maintain our defenses. At the end of that year, assuming he has fulfilled his service satisfactorily, his crime will be considered paid for and his record will be cleared." Jonas felt his heart sink. 1 year. 1 year of separation from Henna, 1 year of not knowing if she was safe or even alive, But it was better than death, better than watching her be executed. He could survive 1 year if it meant she would be free. You understand and accept these terms? Morrison asked. I do, Jonas said, and you, Henna Ashford. You understand that you must leave human territories and not return. Henna was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on Jonas. Then she nodded slowly. I understand. Then this matter is settled. Henna Ashford will be escorted to the borderlands and released. Jonas Landry will begin his term of service immediately. They were separated right there in the hall, guards pulling them in different directions despite Jonas's protests. He managed to catch Henna's hand one last time, squeezing it desperately. Find the cave system I told you about, he said urgently. The one in the western hills where the stream cuts through the rock. Wait for me there. 1 year I will find you. Jonas, promise me you will wait. I promise, Henna said, her voice breaking. 1 year. Then she was gone, pulled away by guards who were already preparing horses to take her back to the borderlands. Jonas watched her go, his heart breaking with every step that took her further away. But he forced himself to stand tall, to accept his sentence with dignity, because he had bought Henna her life, and that was worth any price. The year that followed was the longest of Jonas's life. He worked from dawn to dusk, repairing fences and guard towers, maintaining roads and bridges, doing whatever labor the settlement required. The work was hard but not unbearable, and Jonas threw himself into it with single-minded determination. The faster he completed his sentence, the sooner he could go to Henna. He thought about her constantly, wondering if she was safe, if she had found the cave system he had described, if she was waiting for him as she had promised. Some nights he lay awake in the bunk he shared with other laborers and stared at the ceiling, tracing patterns in the wood grain and imagining her face. Esther Whitley visited him sometimes, bringing extra food or simply sitting with him during his brief rest periods. She never asked about his relationship with Henna, never questioned whether what he felt was real or wise. She simply accepted it, and Jonas was grateful for her quiet support. My son used to say that the orc woman who saved him had the saddest eyes he had ever seen, Esther told him one evening. He said she looked like someone who had seen too much pain for her young years. Your orc has that same look. Her name is Henna. Henna, it is a good name, strong. Esther was quiet for a moment. When your service is complete, will you go to her? Yes. Even knowing that you may never be able to return to human lands? Yes. Esther nodded, as if this was the answer she had expected. Then I hope you find the happiness you are looking for, Jonas Landry, and I hope the world learns from what you two are trying to build. The seasons changed, winter giving way to spring, spring to summer, summer to autumn. Jonas marked each day, each week, each month that brought him closer to the end of his sentence. He watched the leaves change color and fall, watched the first snow of the new winter begin to dust the ground, and felt his anticipation growing almost unbearable. Finally, on a cold morning in late autumn, Magistrate Morrison came to find him. Your sentence is complete, Jonas Landry. You have served your time with diligence and without complaint. You are free to go. Jonas did not wait for further permission. He gathered his few possessions, accepted a pack of supplies that Esther had quietly arranged for him, and set out walking toward the western hills before the sun had fully risen. He walked for 3 days, following streams and game trails, navigating by landmarks he had memorized during his years on the frontier. When he finally found the cave system, his heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. The entrance was hidden behind a waterfall, exactly as he remembered, and Jonas had to wade through icy water to reach it. Inside, the cave opened up into a series of chambers, lit by gaps in the stone ceiling that let in filtered sunlight. "Henna," he called, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Henna, are you here?" For a terrible moment there was no answer, and Jonas felt despair threatening to swallow him. What if she had not waited? What if something had happened to her? What if he was too late? Then he heard movement from one of the deeper chambers, and Henna emerged into the light. She looked thinner than he remembered, her face drawn with the strain of a year of isolation, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. They ran to each other, colliding in an embrace that nearly knocked them both over. "You came," Henna said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I was starting to think I had dreamed you. I promised I would find you. 1 year." Jonas pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, memorizing every detail he had been missing. "I am here now, and I am not leaving again. What about your settlement, your home?" "My home is wherever you are." Jonas kissed her, pouring a year of longing and loneliness into the gesture. "I told you once that I wanted to build a new world with you. I still want that, if you will have me." Henna kissed him back, fierce and desperate. "I will have you, Jonas Landry. For as long as you will stay. Then you had better prepare yourself for a very long stay." They spent that night in the cave, wrapped in each other's arms, relearning the feel of being close. They talked until their voices were hoarse, catching up on everything that had happened during their year apart. Henna told him about the long, lonely months of waiting, about the times she had almost given up hope and left to seek her fortune elsewhere. Jonas told her about his service, about Esther's kindness, about the nights when he had stared at the stars and wondered if Henna was looking at the same sky. "What do we do now?" Henna asked as dawn began to break outside the cave. "We cannot stay here forever. Winter is coming, and this cave will not provide enough shelter. We go back to my cabin," Jonas said. "It is remote enough that we should be safe, and I know the land there. We can build a life. What if the patrol comes back? What if Thomas decides to finish what he started? Then we deal with it together. But I do not think he will. Magistrate Morrison's ruling set a precedent. The people of Milford know about you now, know your story. If Thomas comes after us, he will be acting outside the law, and I do not think he wants that." It was a risk, but all their options were risky. In the end, they decided together to return to Jonas's cabin, to reclaim the space where they had first fallen in love and see if they could make it into a permanent home. The journey back took a week, moving carefully to avoid settlements and patrols. When they finally crested the hill that overlooked Jonas's property, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. The cabin looked just as he had left it, weathered but still standing, the greenhouse intact and the garden overgrown but salvageable. "Welcome home," Jonas said, taking Henna's hand. They set to work immediately, repairing damage from the year of neglect and preparing for the coming winter. Jonas hunted and set trap lines while Henna tended the garden and greenhouse, coaxing life back into plants that had survived on nothing but determination. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and plan their future, talking about the life they wanted to build. "I want to grow more than just vegetables," Henna said one night. "I want to plant an orchard. Apple trees and cherry trees, things that will take years to bear fruit but will be there for generations to come." "Then we will plant an orchard," Jonas agreed. "And we will build a proper bedroom, one where we do not have to choose between sleeping by the fire or freezing in the cellar. And maybe, someday, we will have children, half human, half orc. I do not know if such a thing is even possible, but if it is, they will grow up knowing that they are loved and that they do not have to choose between their parents' peoples." Jonas pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Whatever the future brings, we will face it together." Winter came, and with it, a test of their resolve. The cold was brutal, and supplies ran low despite their best efforts. There were nights when Jonas worried they would not make it through, when he questioned whether returning to the cabin had been a mistake. But Henna remained steady, her strength and determination carrying them through the darkest days. Spring arrived like a gift, bringing with it thawing ground and the promise of new growth. Jonas and Henna planted their garden and began work on the orchard, setting out young saplings that would not bear fruit for years, but represented their commitment to a future together. They also built additions to the cabin, expanding it from a single room into a proper home with separate spaces for sleeping, cooking, and working. As the seasons passed, they began to see signs that the world was changing around them. Other humans, inspired by the story of Jonas and Henna, began to question the old hatreds. Some even reached out, cautiously at first, to orc communities about trade and peaceful coexistence. It was slow progress, hampered by centuries of mistrust and violence, but it was progress nonetheless. Esther Whitley visited once, making the long journey to their cabin to see how they were faring. She stayed for a week, helping with the garden and sharing news from Milford. Before she left, she pressed a small pouch into Jonas's hand. "Seeds," she explained, "from my own garden. Plant them here, so that part of your home will always carry a piece of the settlement that let you live." Jonas and Henna planted the seeds together, and as they watched the first green shoots emerge from the soil, Jonas felt something he had not experienced in years: hope for a future that was better than the past. 2 years after Jonas had completed his sentence, Henna came to him with news that changed everything. She was pregnant. The healers she had consulted through carefully worded messages to sympathetic humans and orcs could not say for certain what to expect from a human orc child. But Henna was healthy and strong, and they decided to face this new challenge with the same determination that had carried them through everything else. Their daughter was born on a spring morning, screaming her arrival with impressive lung power. She had green skin, lighter than Henna's, and small tusks that would probably grow more prominent as she aged. Her ears were pointed like her mother's, but her eyes were the same brown as Jonas's. She was perfect, a bridge between two worlds made flesh. They named her Hope, because that was what she represented. Raising hope was not easy. They had no guidebook for parenting a child who was neither fully human nor fully orc, and they had to navigate questions of identity and belonging that neither of them had anticipated. But they did it together, teaching Hope about both of her heritages, making sure she understood that she was not torn between two worlds but rather belonged to both. As Hope grew, so did the fragile peace between humans and orcs. The story of Jonas and Henna became a legend of sorts, told in both human settlements and orc clans, proof that it was possible to choose love over hatred, understanding over fear. Other mixed couples began to emerge, hesitant at first but emboldened by the precedent Jonas and Henna had set. Jonas and Henna's cabin became a kind of sanctuary, a place where humans and orcs could meet on neutral ground to trade and talk. They never sought out this role, but it came to them nonetheless, and they accepted it with the same quiet determination that had characterized their entire relationship. Years passed. Hope grew into a strong, intelligent young woman who moved between human and orc communities with ease, serving as a translator and mediator in disputes. Jonas's hair turned gray, and Henna's face acquired the weathered look of someone who had lived through hard times and emerged stronger. Their orchard bore fruit, their garden flourished, and their home became a symbol of what was possible when people chose to see past their differences. On a warm summer evening, sitting on the porch they had built together overlooking their land, Jonas took Henna's hand and marveled at how far they had come from that desperate night when she had collapsed at his doorstep. "You ever regret it?" he asked. Giving up your clan, your people, for this life. Henna squeezed his hand, her tusks showing in a smile that still made Jonas's heart skip. I gave up a clan that wanted me to be someone I could not be, but I gained a family that accepts me exactly as I am. I gained you and hope and a life I never thought possible. So no, Jonas Landry, I do not regret it for a single moment. Good, Jonas said, pulling her close, because I do not think I could survive losing you now. You will never have to find out. I am not going anywhere. They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, and watched their daughter play with the neighborhood children, both human and orc, who had come to regard Jonas and Henna's land as a safe haven. It was not the life either of them had planned, but it was a good life, built on a foundation of kindness and courage, and the simple belief that love was stronger than hatred. The orc who had begged to stay one more night in his doorway had become his partner, his love, his family. And in building a life together, they had helped build a better world, one small act of kindness at a time. It was not a perfect world, not yet, but it was a world where a human and an orc could sit together on their porch, holding hands as the stars began to appear, and know that they had earned their place in it through nothing more complicated than choosing to see each other's humanity, even when the rest of the world insisted it did not exist. As night fell completely and hope finally came inside, tired from playing, Jonas tucked his daughter into bed and kissed her forehead. She looked up at him with eyes that held both her mother's strength and his own determination. "Tell me the story again," Hope said sleepily. "About how you and Mama met." Jonas smiled and sat on the edge of her bed. "It started on the coldest night of winter when someone knocked on my door and asked for help. I could have turned them away, but I did not. And that one choice, that one moment of choosing kindness, changed everything." "Because Mama was brave," Hope added, fighting a yawn. "Because your Mama was brave," Jonas agreed. "And because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help when you need it." Hope's eyes drifted closed, and Jonas sat with her until her breathing deepened into sleep. Then he returned to the porch, where Henna was waiting, and they sat together under the stars, two people from different worlds who had found their way home. The end was really just the beginning, Jonas thought, as Henna leaned her head on his shoulder. Every ending was a beginning, if you had the courage to turn the page and start writing a new story. And their story, the story of the human who had opened his door and the orc who had been brave enough to knock, would continue for the rest of their lives and echo in the lives of everyone they touched. It was not the story either of them had expected to live, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect.